Hey, everybody. Welcome. We're really excited about this. My name is Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm your host today, joined as always by my handsome and charismatic co host, Philip Leitz of Arids Only. You can see our names and our Instagram tags are there below us on the screen if you're interested in following along with what we do. And yeah, we're really excited to jump into this and check out your enclosures. Thanks to all who submitted. I know that Savannah put in some awesome enclosures, and we've got a few others that we're going to be checking out here pretty shortly. So I'm excited about that. And before we do, we want to talk about Happy Dragons a little bit. First, I want to show you our Happy Dragons Plus Quarter 1 calendar. Here we've got some fun stuff coming up in March with a live guest Q&A with Mariah from Reptifiles. She's a legend. We're also going to be doing a live podcast on the 9th of March. And then, of course, our next webinar stream is going to be the history of herpetoculture. And that's going to be a lot of fun. So what is all of this about? Let's talk about Happy Dragons Plus. Phil, tell us about it.
All right, let's see. Happy Dragons Plus is the ultimate subscription designed to help you on your reptile care journey. The following is a little bit of a list of the perks that you'll get with Happy Dragons Plus. Subscribers can submit photos and questions for interactive live stream content, like the Enclosure review that we're doing today. Future live streams will include both public streams like this one, in which subscribers can be a part of, as well as private streams that will be exclusively streamed on Happy Dragons Plus. It will also have several Q&A forums where you can ask experts like Mariah Healy of Reptifiles and various breeders your questions directly. Early notification of breeder listings and ability to reserve animals first before the general public. You'll immediately get access to exclusive discounts for supplies and brands partnered with Happy Dragons, starting with $50 off Bug Factory pods. In the coming weeks, we will also be launching the Happy Dragons Supply Store, where we will be offering discounts for Happy Dragons Plus members. And in the next few months, we'll also have online courses coming, curated by reptile experts and on various topics like raising feeders at home. You can join Happy Dragons Plus for just $9 a month, or you can save by subscribing quarterly for $25 for 3 months. Quarterly subscribers will also have access to personalized enclosure consulting with Mariah Healy of Reptifiles, and will be the first to try new features, which is pretty cool. If you want to try out Happy Dragons Plus, sign up now and you'll get a 1-week free trial. The link to claim that free trial is in the video description, and we will be dropping it in the chat periodically. We've already had some really great and passionate people join the community, and we're really looking forward to creating a place where everyone can share their knowledge and we can all learn from one another. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is. I'm really excited about it. So I think this is going to be an amazing community, and I'm really grateful to be a part of it. So thanks to everyone who's already jumped in. And yeah, with that, I think that we can move on to the next section of our thing here, and that's going to be reviewing some enclosures of y'all. So yeah, we've had a handful of people submit enclosures, so we're going to just go through them one by one, and Phil and I will be able to have a look and offer our feedback, any suggestions we might have for how they can be improved, or we'll just talk about what's working really well, and hopefully shower some praise, because I'm pretty sure that all of these enclosures submitted are pretty amazing. So
Unless they're horrible.
So all right, let's go to it. Here we go. So here's our first enclosure. This one was submitted by Savannah, and this is for Husk, an Abronia aurita, an incredible species of lizard in the alligator lizard family that's native to Mexico and Guatemala. I'm not sure which if aurita is Guatemala or Mexico, but that's where that genus is from, that kind of region of Central America. So it looks like we've got incredible lighting array here with 2 LED jungle dawns for really rich visible light, and that's going to be excellent for your plant growth. And we've got a 35-watt halogen for heat to provide a basking spot, allowing this incredible lizard to thermoregulate. And we also have a 14% Arcadia T5. So that's a nice high UV output, which is a really great bulb choice, especially in the case of this enclosure, which if you notice the screen at the top is a kind of a finer screen there. And so that's going to block a lot of UV. One way to kind of correct for that and to still provide a nice high UV output for your animals is to provide a higher percentage bulb than you might normally. So in some setups, a 6% would probably be sufficient for this lizard, but in this particular case, because of that fine mesh is there, a 14% is the better choice. So that's awesome to see that. And yeah, so some details about this also. Obviously, we've got a 3D background on 3 sides there. I mean, that's just amazing. This is also a fully bioactive setup, which for a lizard like an Abronia is a great choice because the waste that they're going to be producing is going to be something that's going to be pretty easily managed by a nice cleanup crew. So, I mean, obviously, visually, I would say this enclosure is a 10 out of 10. It's gorgeous. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's beautiful. It's well constructed. It's well put together. I can imagine. I mean, honestly, it's a little bit. It's going to be one of those ones where it's somewhat challenging to offer, like especially critical feedback, right?
Yeah.
Because so much of this is quite nice. I will say, I can imagine a circumstance in which, let's just pretend hypothetically that you have to get your animal, like you have to access your animal for some reason, a move, an emergency, a vet visit, you name it. I can envision this being very difficult to access that animal if that animal doesn't want to be accessed um, in that event. Now, I could be wrong about that. Some of that could just be what I'm looking at, and maybe it's actually a little bit easier to disassemble and get inside of in a way that I'm not recognizing. Um, but there's so much about this particular piece that's so nice, that has so many positive characteristics, like the ones that Roy mentioned. I agree with you about the issue with the screen cutting out the UV. That can be a bit of a problem. I'd be really curious to know if perhaps if this is entirely screen, like basically what I'm trying to get at is I'd be really curious to know how ventilation is working for you, right? Because um, granted, I got to add a little caveat here. I've kept a Bronia before, but in terms of understanding their exact needs and nuances, I'm certainly by no means qualified. But granted, I know that a Bronia are coming from the coming from cloud forests, and therefore they need high humidity, relatively low temps, and pretty decent ventilation too. So I'd be curious. I'd be worried about some of that humidity vacating the enclosure immediately if it's pure screen. But if the sides are covered up, then that could be absolutely not an issue, not a factor. So I suppose I can't be I can't I obviously don't know 100% here, but I'm just honestly I'm being really nitpicky at this point because this is such a beautiful setup. I'm just um, trying to be as comprehensive as I possibly can be. Um, so don't judge me too harshly if I'm misunderstanding something, Savannah, because these are both of the setups you submitted are stunning. So, um, you know, don't don't get mad at me if I'm being too critical.
Looks like Savannah's adding a bit into the live chat too about using 120 millimeter fans, so like PC fans. So
Mm,
that's awesome.
nice.
So there are 120 millimeter fans mounted on the lower left side, and then dual 80 millimeter fans running as exhaust up top. So it's providing this excellent cross through ventilation, and that's especially important for species like Abronia that are montane species. This is a species that is occupying a little bit higher elevations, and for that reason, it tends to be a little bit more important to prioritize better airflow for species like this because there's just a lot of airflow in those upland habitats like that, a lot more wind than you'd expect in the kind of more stagnant lowland environments. So one other thing I just want to acknowledge about this enclosure is just how well utilized the full volume of the setup is. So you can see
Yeah.
like front to back, there is, it's the full space is filled. And you can really see how this lizard can access basically any part of the full volume of this vivarium. And so you're not dealing with any issues in terms of like wasted space, which is probably, I mean, that's one of the most common issues that I tend to see in enclosure setups is just that the full space isn't utilized to the benefit of the animal. And this enclosure does that beautifully. And another thing I would mention is just how appropriately sized this setup is for the animal. And I don't know if you can tell or if anyone noticed, but you can actually see the lizard in the full enclosure pic down there, kind of the bottom right. So you can see how much space that animal has in comparison to its body mass. It's a lot of space for that lizard, which is just great to see. So kudos to Savannah for setting this up. And I think with that, I want to move on to the next one. I think this is also one by Savannah, so let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Equally epic.
Yeah, wow. Another
Oh,
fantastic
nice.
setup. Um, yeah, so this one is also for an Abronia Orita, and Savannah did correct that they are from Guatemala, so that is helpful. Thanks for that. And
Nice.
this one's name is Echo. And again, pretty much same setup in terms of the heating and lighting array. You've got your dual Jungle Dawn LEDs and the 35-watt halogen for offering that infrared for a nice basking area. And again, the 14% Arcadia T5 that's helping to correct for the UV loss by the mesh. And this one, again, I mean, honestly, very little to offer for me in terms of like critique about how this can be improved. I think that this is a pretty
Yeah.
stellar setup.
About as good gets.
Yeah, about as good as it gets. I mean, I also really like the branch placement in this one in particular. Savannah's used these cork branches really beautifully to provide both horizontal and kind of more upright 45-degree angle, a little bit sharper than that, almost vertical perches, which is great for arboreal lizards because sometimes they want to utilize a perch that's maybe not what you would expect. A lot of people tend to really like horizontal perches, but a lot of lizards tend to like vertical perches. So offering both is a great way to really provide the maximum available opportunity for this animal. Really beautiful setup.
Yeah, that's great. Honestly, yeah, really. There's so much. Also visually, the like Roy mentioned, the utilization of of like the full space of the interior of the enclosure. I just want to re-emphasize that. I love the various perches and various obstacles at different angles, different positions, both in terms of their position relating to the lights, but also just like the ability for the animal to really utilize all of this space. This is honestly, my enclosures look like crap compared to this. This is good job.
Yeah, this is what I would call like a zoo quality display. It's like
Yeah,
you've got live plants. A lot of these plants too are appropriate for the species in terms of like the habitat. Abronia are native to these really rich montane cloud forest kind of environments full of these, exquisite oak trees covered in, tillandsias and bromeliads. And you can see the Spanish moss, that's a tillandsia there, and all these lovely bromeliads in here. So it's just fantastic. Really, really well done.
yeah,
And
super nice.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there's to say. I think I'm gonna move on to our third enclosure. Thank you again, Savannah, for submitting these. These are inspiring setups. This is exactly what I like to see. So, thanks a lot for
Agreed.
this. Okay. All right. So we've got one here from Brianna. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Um, Here we go, Phil. Ornate
Yeah,
Uromastics setup.
yeah,
And
yeah.
So this is a 36 by 18 by 18 enclosure. Our hardware on this is a 90-watt halogen heat bulb plus a 50-watt halogen that can be turned on cold days. Again, this is an arid species that comes from essentially North Africa, the Middle East, a very very hot region.
Israel.
Yeah,
Israel.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And and you've got an Arcadia 12% bulb, nice high UV output, and that's mounted internally in the vivarium, so it's not losing any of that UV output from the mesh. It's getting the full benefit of the UV, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
it looks like so the build it's built on a glass enclosure, and this is intended as a grow out enclosure. So this is for the animal as it's still growing. It's a young animal, and its full adult enclosure I'm imagining will be larger than this. And
Yeah.
Brianna started out with styrofoam insulation walls and the floor, and then used spray foam and Polygem 307 light sculpting epoxy, which is just phenomenal. I mean, this is
Yeah.
this is like incredibly well done background. You know, this is like a zoo level display, and I love this. Like, is it like a cave up at the upper right there that this like kind of little like nook that the lizard can climb into? I mean,
Looks like it.
so cool, just amazing. And
Yeah. So I
go ahead,
no,
Phil.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry. So all right. So a couple of things that I think would make a big difference here. So Brianna, all of this is super nice. I'm actually fairly familiar. Brianna got her Euro from me, and so I know a little bit about kind of what she's up to here. There's a lot of great stuff happening. I would one of two things that I might encourage you to consider. One would be actually swapping, like alternating the lights from one side to the other, getting that halogen to shine on on the other side of the enclosure, and I'll explain why in a second. Now, what I can't tell is I'm not exactly clear spatially about how the on the right side of the enclosure there's this big cave, right? And what I can't tell is how far towards the front of the enclosure that cave gets, because basically the reason I would suggest switching the placement of the lights is so that way the basking light would be coming down and hitting multiple surfaces to provide multiple basking zones at various temperatures. Now, it might get a little bit too hot where the 90-watt, because if it's a 90-watt halogen, it might get a little too hot on that uppermost basking platform, but you might be able to lower the wattage of the basking bulb just a little bit and make it so that very top part of the cave hits like a very high temperature, and then those subsequent two or three stones beneath that segment of the cave will hit slightly lower temperatures. But the reason I would do that is because I like the idea that those big flat rocks act as a big basking platform. I see you're doing the same thing on the left side here under the basking light, but I'd like to see that basking zone get spread out just a little bit more to make it so the animal can really get the whole, like its whole body from tip of nose to tip of tail under that full range of heat. You could also do this by adding a second basking bulb on that left side, taking that 50-watt halogen that you have and adding it as supplemental lighting on the left hand side. You could paste inside the enclosure. You could double or triple the number of rocks and features and logs and stones that you have inside this enclosure and give the animal that much more space to utilize and explore and exercise on. But I mean, I say that, also understanding that the cage looks great as it is, and I know how much work you put into making it. These are just things that you could add in to help take it to that next level. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean this is a fantastic setup. The one thing I would potentially add, and this is honestly mostly for aesthetic, it could serve some functional encouragement as well, and that would be some sort of texture in the form of like foliage of like spindly small sticks. Like
Yep.
try to
Like
imagine like a
manzanita.
yeah like manzanita exactly. And if you need a manzanita hookup, send me an email or a message on Instagram. I have plenty of manzanita. I can send you some for this exact purpose if you'd like. But basically, that'll do a couple things. One, providing that like texture, I think visually looks great in a super arid setup like this because obviously it's so xeric, it's so like rock focused. That just adding in a little bit of plant material in there just can help it feel a little bit more balanced aesthetically in a way. But
Hmm.
also those nice little spindly branches like that, especially if they're in like kind of a dense cluster like they would be in a in a naturally growing shrub, create a bit of visual barrier, which can help your animal, have more options in terms of like, okay, maybe it wants to be partially concealed behind just a little bit of like a visual barrier. It's not like completely concealing the animal, but it's just creating a little bit more texture and cover to help the animal feel secure. Um, but really, I mean, like I said, that's basically splitting hairs. I think that this is a fantastic setup. So, and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Phil is like far and away, far more qualified than I am to offer like feedback in terms of the hardware on this one than I am. So, really, really nicely done.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. It's super nice.
All right, so
This next one's gonna be these next
um,
two are gonna be really fun to talk about.
yeah, I'm excited about
A
this
lot.
next one as well. So let's move on to our fourth setup. This one has been submitted by Grillidae per kcal. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is for a leopard gecko named Asia. And I mean, first of all, we got to talk about the dimensions of this thing. So this
Yeah.
setup is 78 by 60 by 60. So that's 6.5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet for a single leopard gecko. So an
Yeah.
incredible
Nice.
amount of space. And for heat, because again, we're offering such a large space, the heat here is 2 to 3 125-watt GE heat lamps. I believe those would be halogens. And then UVB is provided by a 4 foot ReptiSun 5.0 T5. And
Nice.
LEDs, there are two 50-watt outdoor flood LEDs. Those are very bright at that wattage for LED. The substrate in here is a thin layer of topsoil in most areas. And for decor, we have two plastic bins. One is an elevated basking area, and the other is a large dig box with two species of ficus trees in here. And it looks like also we've got a whole bunch of plants. I'm not sure what's a faux plant and what's a real plant in this setup. I think that there's maybe a mix, but I'm not positive. I see maybe some eucalyptus leaves, or
Cool.
and some grass, and I mean, this is just it's honestly really cool to see somebody providing this kind of space for a leopard gecko because just the reality is that by providing an animal with this amount of space in comparison to its body mass, you're going to be able to see behaviors that you otherwise just could not see in a smaller space. Of my friend Zach Porritt, who's a Life Exotic on Instagram, and he has literally an entire greenhouse that he's set up, like an outdoor greenhouse that he's got all kinds of different species in it, but like a lot of them are he has dart frogs that are able to roam this whole space, and because of that, he's seeing you know behaviors
Yeah.
from them in a 20-foot by 30-foot greenhouse that would be impossible to see in a vivarium. So that's just really cool.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I have a few things I'd like to say if that's, as long as I'm not interrupting you,
No,
Roy.
good, please,
Uh,
please.
so I second everything you said, and I don't disagree in any way, shape, or form. Like I love when someone goes above and beyond for such like an otherwise like common or sort of like entry level pet reptile, right? Like, or at least that's what kind of how a lot of us consider leopard geckos. And so I hope that the things I'm about to add are not seen as in any way like super critical or anything like that at all. Um, region where leopard geckos and some of their close species relatives come from. As much as I enjoy the level of foliage in here, I'd really like to see um, some development of like almost like hills and piles of that topsoil and rock combination because uh, actually it's kind of interesting to note that leopard geckos actually share some habitat with a few species of uromastyx, notably Sara loricata and Sara asmusi, which they used to be uromastyx, but now they're Sara. And if you look at some of that habitat, it really is like um, you're kind of I would kind of imagine like a almost like an Arizona esque or like a slightly more humid Arizona type habitat. And it's not that the foliage isn't a wonderful addition, and I would encourage you to keep a lot of it in there, but I would imagine that the leopard gecko might be able to utilize some more like earth, whether that's the stone and the ability for the stone to fill that 3D space in a way that may be more utilizable for the leopard gecko than all the plants and branches. Now, I don't know that. For all I know, that leopard gecko might be getting up on all those branches and climbing around no problem. I'm sure they're adept at climbing to some degree. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But the other thing that would allow you to be able to do is to create some spaces where the leopard gecko could burrow in and get in between and underneath a lot of the rocks and stones. You'd have various caves. I've seen a lot of really cool videos of leopard geckos inhabiting sort of like the more earthen parts of rock outcroppings and cliff sides where it's hilly, but there's a lot of indentations and small caves, for lack of basically cavities in the rock, cavities in the earth where they're digging in and out of, moving in and out of, hugging that sideline of the rock outcropping for security. And again, I'm sure the plants are providing some level of similar security and similar climbing capacity. So again, don't feel like I'm not trying to come down on your setup or anything at all. It's a beautiful setup. It's very nicely done. So I hope I'm coming across in a way that makes sense. Did that make sense to you, Roy? Did it sound
Yeah,
like
totally.
nonsense?
No, I totally get what you're getting at. It does make sense to
Okay.
me. I'm also noticing in the chat, Gorilla Day per
Yeah.
KCal has added
Yeah.
that this one picture doesn't really show everything in there, which of course it couldn't. Like
I
this
believe
is a
that.
massive space,
Yeah.
and but there's an area where the leopard gecko can dig into
Yeah.
about a foot of soil, which is amazing. Because
Oh,
again,
that's awesome.
like I mean, to provide even if it is an area within this larger setup, providing a foot of depth in soil would be hard to do in a standard vivarium in most orientations. So it's really cool to see that. And
Yeah.
I think also I'm not positive, but I think that this might be constructed. Maybe Gorilla Day per Kcal can add in the chat. But is this made from like a grow tent? I feel like it might be. I might see that material in the background, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm not positive what it is, but
I could
I
see
think
that.
it might be that. And
That's pretty
that's one thing I
cool.
just want to praise in terms of like I really like the spirit of figuring out ways to utilize existing materials that might be used in other
Yeah.
arenas and avenues for the benefit of our reptiles. And this is a really great application for that. Yeah, so it is a grow tent, and I just think
Excellent.
that's so cool because again, it also makes it a lot more accessible because a grow tent at that size is going to be far less costly to acquire than
Oh, yeah.
like a PVC or a wooden vivarium this size. It's much more approachable and accessible, and it's still taking all the right boxes. It's still providing all the needs for this
Yeah.
animal and then some. This is just
This is
awesome.
it's these enclosures are all I find them really inspirational here because honestly it makes me feel like my enclosures are kind of crap. Thanks a lot, guys.
We gotta just do a Phil enclosure review coming
Oh
up.
God.
Once we get to 100,000
Do it.
subscribers, we'll do a Phil enclosure review. We'll just roast him. Just kidding. I love Phil's
Oh
enclosures.
God.
Okay, so we're
It's
gonna go
true.
on to the next one now. Thank you again for submitting this. This is like just again awesome to see. So
Beautiful.
all right, so number 5, this is an anonymous submission, and it's a grow out enclosure for some baby ackies. Dimensions
Okay.
are 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. We
Mhm.
have a halogen flood for heat with also some under substrate heat cable. That's excellent, especially for species like varanids that really tend to like warm soil. I know that's really critical for nesting varanids. A lot of the
Yep.
times they need their substrate, their nesting area to be quite warm. We also have a jungle dawn for visible light and a UVB bulb in there as well. And this is a bioactive setup. I see a variety of live plants in there, which is great to see. And this is this submitter's first custom background, which is, I mean, this is an outstanding job for a first background, or really for any background, in
Mhm.
my opinion. Um, and they also note that they're working on a way better enclosure currently, but that it was not
Mhm.
finished in time for this stream. So more to come in the
Mhm.
future, sounds like.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
go ahead, Phil.
okay. So yeah. So a couple of things to say again, just in praise of this enclosure. It's quite complex, quite rich in terms of its exploration utility. The animals can really like get around and do a whole hell of a lot of things, and making it bioactive, I'm sure, helps with cleanup. Groups of baby ackies can be notoriously poopy, so I get it. Um, the one thing that I'd really like to see is one of two things, and it may or may not be super easy. It may be something that you consider the next time you make a build. Who knows? Um, the first would be, I think it would be wise to use stone as your basking surface. And there's a couple of reasons why I say that. The first being, you could conceivably get away with a slightly lower wattage of heat lamp, which could be useful for helping maintain the thermal gradient in a 4 foot enclosure. Because if it's 4 feet, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult with how hot Ackie monitors really need it. Using a stone or like a piece of slate, whatnot, will actually absorb and hold a lot more heat than the wood will. And so the other thing, the other element of this is that by using a piece of slate or stone underneath that halogen bulb, um, you're also conceivably going to give more of that heat. You're going to let more of that heat spread out, right? Making it so that the basking zone is maybe less small, and especially considering it's for baby ackies, which means you're going to have multiple animals in there. It's really important to have a basking zone and a basking surface and a basking space that's big enough for all those animals to kind of inhabit without having to pile on top of one another. Additionally, if you didn't want to do that, it might be worth adding either switching from just one single bulb to using two bulbs angled towards the same point on on the basking surface. So you're creating a much larger space that can all reach the same temperature. And if you didn't want to do that, another option would be to have more than one bulb and each bulb might be pointed somewhere else in the enclosure. So you might have a bulb that's pointed on the back wall, and then another bulb that's pointed on this left wall. And those two surfaces could serve as multiple basking platforms, so that way you are less likely to encounter the animals competing over a single basking zone or basking area. Because as it stands now, those halogens can create a relatively narrow beam. So in a 4x2, that particular beam of light where it's brightest is probably anywhere from 6 to 8 inches in diameter, and you'd like it to be wider, closer to a foot, and uh, just to help for all those things, right? Better metabolic functioning, because the whole animal can get hot, so they can get hot faster, making it so they're not going to compete over that basking site. Um, Belly heat, especially for insectivorous and carnivorous reptiles, can be super important. Being able making it so that if it's stone, it's going to hold and retain and generate a lot of that heat, and that belly heat's really important for those lizards. So I think that could be another aspect that might be quite quite useful, in my opinion. I don't know how Roy, if you agree or if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I think that that's a great suggestion. I mean, honestly, again, I don't have a ton of critical feedback on this setup. I
Yeah,
think that it
it's very
provides
nice.
really beautifully for the animals in terms of the space, how it's set up. It's a nice complexity, like you mentioned. But the one thing I did think about was the basking area and the potential use of stone, because you've got thermal mass basically, and that is just a really valuable thing to have in a setup like this. The only other thing I would say to potentially think about, and this isn't necessarily critical, but it's something to maybe experiment with in certain contexts, and that's just given that this is as a setup for baby Ackies, more than one Ackie, is to provide more than one basking area if possible. And again,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's hard to do, in a setup like this without getting it too hot, essentially overwhelming your heat gradient. But if you're using
Right.
smaller bulbs,
Lower
and
wattage.
if you can provide more than one, that can be cool because this is something I try to do as often as I can with setups where I'm cohabitating animals. I do that quite frequently here. I even have some mixed species displays, so I'm not in any way opposed to cohabitation. I think it can be done well, and it really just depends on the species, the circumstances, the setup. It's a very nuanced subject, but one thing I like to do when I'm cohabitating is to provide more than one basking area to just give the animals the option to bask independently, so they're not competing for that thermal resource, if that makes sense. So that's one thing I
Mm-hmm.
would say to consider. I don't know if that's applicable for this setup. Maybe it's something applicable for the upgrade that's coming, but just
Mm-hmm.
something to keep in the back of your mind and to maybe experiment with.
Yeah, that's kind of what I envisioned, was like this is stuff that could go into the new build. I find I really think that the lower wattage but more than one bulb is just such a powerful way to manage this stuff, and for more than one reason, right? So one is that um, you can it can be really really helpful for making sure you have a solid combination of both surface temperature and air temperature for your basking zone. One of the things that I see with when we have one high powered halogen is oftentimes you get a bit of a mismatch between your surface and air temperature basking zones, or basking range, especially with those high powered halogens on stone. When it's a single bulb, you'll get a super hot surface temp that
Mm.
always accompanies that maybe more normal range air temperature that comes as a result of that high powered bulb. Whereas when you have uh, more than one lower power bulb doing the work, you're going to get a better, more even heating that results in like a more matched surface temp to air temp combination, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Definitely something that I'm wanting to do more here is as
Yeah.
I build some of my setups and upgrade them is to rely, yeah, like you said, on multiple small bulbs rather than just one
Yes.
large one. I really like the way that goes.
I'm doing that here with everything. Like one single bulb for my, especially for like an adult Euromastix. Now with baby
Right.
Ackies,
Yeah.
I get it. They're smaller animals, right? So you can get
Right.
away with it. But with like a larger animal or an adult Euro, it's like it's a nightmare. Like you really got to use multiple bulbs. Otherwise, it's so hard to get that matching combo of air plus surface temp. I feel like so often we only consider one or the other, right? I can't. It's really hard with a single halogen bulb to get that proper combo unless the whole room is heated and cooled to accommodate the cage.
Mm.
In my experience, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So let's
Cool.
move on to our sixth setup. And this is our last one for today. And this one was
Mhm.
submitted by Jenna. And this is for Elim, the leopard gecko. Another fantastic leopard gecko setup. This is 42 inches by 20 inches by 18 inches high. We have a gradient of roughly 93 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat is provided by a 90-watt halogen. There on the right
Yeah.
side, you can see. And we have 7% 12-inch Arcadia UV. That's the shade dweller, I believe. And this is a DIY build. It's a birch plywood, solid oak tracks, CNC cut vents. Look at those awesome vents on the sides. I love that. Very
Yeah,
cool.
pretty cool.
Magnetic substrate barrier. That's a cool way to use use the magnets as well. Very neat. Substrate
Yeah.
is a 50-50 topsoil and decomposed granite blend. I love that blend. I use it here a lot. Decomposed granite is the unsung hero of reptile substrates, in my opinion.
Yep.
And yeah, all the rocks and wood are collected from the wilds. How dare you? That is so
I
dangerous.
hope you,
Just kidding.
I hope you, I hope you boiled and desanitized all of those so you don't destroy your animal's microbiome. No, is that is that a? I just want to. Okay, I don't know if that's what this is, but I am pretty sure that little blue bowl is the top of a grinder that is going to be used as like in the same way that a dog or a cat would have a bowl that has
Like a
those grooves
puzzle
in it.
feeder.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle feeder, right? That's got to be what that is.
I think
Am I?
so.
Can Jenna tell me? Jenna, is that right? Am I wrong about that?
It
Maybe
looks.
I don't know.
I think it's safe to assume it's a puzzle feeder of some kind, which
Got to be
makes
a
a
puzzle
lot of
feeder,
sense.
right?
Which is, I mean, which also I love to see just in terms of like, okay, enrichment, and
Yeah.
enrichment in terms of like, you know, feeding is one of the best ways to do it. Whether you're offering novel prey items or a variety of prey items, but also this is like another way to do it. It's not just about diversity of prey, which obviously is very important. I'm not in any way discounting that, but I think it's also really good to offer like different ways to allow the animals to access their prey. One thing that comes to mind
Right.
right now, I want to give a shout out to a friend of Project Herpetoculture, a friend of myself, Michael Brown, who is an amazing DIY guy. And he has a blue tree monitor, and he made this incredible sculpted termite mound filled with little test tube vials that he could put insects into. And so he would put dubia and superworms and all kinds of little bugs into these little test tube vials that then fit into this faux termite mound. And you could sit there, and he said sometimes the monitor would spend an hour just reaching into these test tubes with its incredible long arms and pulling the prey out and just figuring out and using its brain. So I just love to see that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and
Jenna
Jenna
says
says,
there it's a for water,
"Oh, cool.
which is also cool. That's great. Yeah.
That's
I
very
actually
cool."
I've done that quite a bit. I actually have the water bowls that I put in the Euromastics cages over the last couple of years. I've had this tendency to put gravel, like just pea gravel, in the bowl, so that way it's not just a deep pool where it actually looks like water collecting in a pile of rock. So I think this actually does the same kind of thing.
Yep.
That's a great idea. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, we do that
I
for
don't
our bees here, so they don't
yeah,
drown.
and I'd be really curious to know what the other blue that must be. It must have to do with the thermostat, right? That must be a thermostat or hydrometer. The other blue dot thing on the rock on the right,
Tell us, Jenna, when you can.
like a button.
In terms of again, just like okay, to speak to the actual components of the setup, though, I mean, again, fantastic. You've got one thing again that I want to just note right off the bat that I really like about this setup is that this setup allows the lizard that lives in here to move from one end to the other while
Yeah,
remaining completely concealed if it so
hidden. Yep.
desires.
Yep.
There's plenty of decor. There's plenty of visual barriers. The full depth of the enclosure is utilized in terms of front to back space, and yeah, it's just really thoughtfully put together. I really appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I agree. It is quite nice. It's another thing that, and this is again, I feel like I've been like the nitpicky asshole in this
Someone's got to do
particular
it,
review.
Phil.
So I hope none of the I really hope, because all of these enclosures have been really beautiful and really nicely done. And so I'm not in any way trying to offer like hard criticism, right? But one thing that I think I would like to see more frequently in enclosures, that for, especially for quote terrestrial species, is slopes and
Mm.
altitude changes, right? So like in a 4x2, it can, or a 4x20x18, it can be a little bit challenging to do so, and especially when we're trying to make it so our animals aren't able to get too close to the lighting systems up on top. So I totally understand that, but you know, it would be really cool to see a slope in the base level of substrate from one end to the other,
Mm.
right? Or at least maybe if we have 80% of the cage is flat bottom with the decor, and then maybe 20% of one corner is sloped or something like this. Especially when um, the animals can't, it's not an enclosure like the previous one with the uh, why am I having a hard time remembering this?
The
The
Ackies?
the yeah, the one for the Yankees, but has the sculpted
Rock
um,
background.
rock background walls. Yeah,
Hmm.
thank you, rock background. Jeez, I don't know why that was so difficult for me to recall. But in a situation where it doesn't have the rock walls or the rock background, it would just be another way to help add in a little bit of extra space that could be utilized in a different way. And again, highly nitpicky because this is a very, very nice enclosure. It's certainly not. Again,
It's not
highly
lacking.
nitpicky. Yeah, not lacking. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
just brainstorming on my
I
part.
do really like that point about like utilizing slope more in substrate. I think that that's something that like occurred to me at some point along the journey of keeping reptiles, because like I would always put in a layer of substrate and then kind of tamp it down so it was all like a perfectly flat plane, and then at a certain
Right.
point I was like, why am I doing that? Like nothing,
Right.
there's no such thing as that, really. I mean, it's uncommon to see that, out
Right.
in the wild. And so I started kind of adding topography into my setups a little bit, and
Topography.
I really like to do
That's the
that.
one.
It's fun. It also just makes things,
Right.
it just provides more visual interest. And if you are going for a naturalistic aesthetic, I think it helps to achieve that. But again, like
Right.
this enclosure is not lacking. It's really fantastic. And
No, not at all.
yeah, and I also like, again, I want to praise the use of of found materials. Pretty much all of my enclosures are filled with branches and rocks that I find here, on the land that I live on. Much of it is harvested, as a much of it, like the branches and stuff, are a byproduct essentially of managing the land here, for biodiversity. I'm removing, dead wood and material that represents a fire risk. I live in a pretty wildfire prone area, and so I'm constantly doing that. And
Right.
yeah, it's. I think a lot of people can sometimes feel a bit of fear about utilizing stuff that's found outside, but I think that it's largely unfounded, and it's you're
Oh yeah.
you're fully able to go out and utilize that kind of stuff. I mean, give it a scrub if you want. Put it out in the sun for a couple days. Let it bake if you want. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but
Yeah.
it's a really great way to do things as long as you're doing so, legally and sustainably and mindfully.
Legally.
But seriously, like I said earlier, for those who need manzanita, let me know, because
I need Manzanita.
I don't want to just burn all of it. I want to
Roy,
put it in
I
vivs.
desperately I desperately need Manzanita.
All right,
Damn
well,
it.
I'm gonna go get some big boxes and then figure out how much manzanita I can stuff into the biggest box I can find and ship it your way. I'm gonna do the same for Savannah.
I love
So,
you.
yeah, love you too, buddy. All right,
And don't
so
forget to charge me.
oh yeah, of course not, just for the shipping.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm
Well,
gonna go back to our scene so you can see us, and yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody for submitting those enclosures. It's fantastic. This was a great first enclosure review. It's going to be kind of hard to top this moving forward, I think, in terms of the
yeah.
quality of these setups. This is setting a high standard. So hopefully we can
Yes.
keep that rolling. And yeah,
I would love to see I I would love to see more great cages submitted, because this is uh it's highly motivating for me to see this stuff because it makes me want to step up my game with my enclosures.
Yes, always good to have some more inspiration for that. So yeah, I think that we're gonna call it there. Again, thanks for
Cool.
everybody
Yeah.
submitting, and hope everyone enjoyed that little sparkly sticker of my wolf dog Dalva as a closing
I did.
little gesture there. And yeah, we'll be doing this again